Hey everyone, BJ Korros. This is Shout Out for a Cause at Home edition. And joining me from the East Coast,
Gail Weiss Gaspar.
Gail, talking about launching a book during COVID. Was this the anticipated way that you were actually going to launch it? Or did you just figure this was the time to launch the book?
Yes, great question. I never imagined that I'd be launching in a pandemic. And like other authors who have been put in this situation, I always dreamed about becoming an author and writing a book. And I always imagined having, signing books at a bookstore and going on a circuit of meeting with readers in person and going to different cities and setting that all up. And so that didn't happen. And so we are doing it in COVID style and Zoom calls and Facebook Lives and things like that. The other part I want to say is that I've been writing this book for a little over 2 years. And so it certainly started before this. I will say that having the lockdowns and the quarantines was hospitable to sitting in my seat every day. So it did actually help that there weren't those kind of distractions.
Let's talk about the inspiration to writing this book, obviously in honor of your father, carrying my father's torch. Tell us a little bit what inspired you to write something in honor of your dad.
So I talk a lot about heroes and how a lot of us tend to look outside ourselves for heroes. And so my father had been my hero since I was very small. I didn't know his whole story, his being a Holocaust survivor as a child. He kept it from my brother and I locked away. We knew about it, but we really didn't know that many details, because he decided when he became a parent that he was not going to burden his children with the horrors of what he had to go through when he was a teen. And so, he carried the story inside of him. He had another way of making a livelihood. He was a butcher. And so he came to the States. No one really understood nor really cared to hear his background and story. And he just loved being an American and did his thing. So at some point, when my children were small, my parents moved to DC, where we now live, and I got him involved with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and he was scared to death, to walk. He said he approached it a number of times, and he couldn't go near the museum. He couldn't go near the door. And he had no idea that he had any voice or anything to say, because he had never done anything like that before. So watching him, I describe it in the book, watching him get up on that stage for the first time to tell his survivor testimony to hundreds of strangers, it led to decades of doing this, telling the stories. And he, it was very heroic. So the way I'm going to pull this together is I helped him get on that stage where he could speak about his story. And in turn, by agreeing over pastrami and rye in a local diner, when I asked him, how about if I write my story, our story, your story, my story? And he gave me his blessing to do that. And so that in turn opened up my form of expression, which is writing.
Yeah, and that is the greatest legacy one can have for their parents as well. So going through this journey, what did you learn about your hero that you really never knew in growing up? In today's standards, a lot of people couldn't work as hard as your dad could.
This is true. He worked 6 to 7 days a week. He put in 13, 14-hour days sometimes. And he had his one day off, which was Sunday, right? And so I learned, I think the biggest thing I learned was how he and my mom decided to change their legacy story for their children. That they could have easily raised my brother and I in a different way, And they were very intentional about how they wanted to raise us, with more positivity and more creativity and a lot of encouragement. And so there were some things that were missing when I was growing up, like laughter, I say in the book, was really missing in our house growing up. But love was never missing, and encouragement was never missing, and the belief and the trust was never missing. In fact, when I told my father that that the book was getting published, there's a line he loves to use, which is, you were always the writer in the family. And I remember I always encouraged you to write, and I always thought you were a writer. And he would say, I always wanted to write a book, but that wasn't, that didn't end up becoming it for me, but that needed to be it for you. And he's very proud.
Oh, I am sure. But in a way, he did write the book because his words have translated into your words. And so therefore, he's kind of, in a way, the co-author of this book, because he is your hero, right, Gail?
Yeah, absolutely. So he is my hero, and he helped me find the heroine of my story as well. And so I believe what works so beautifully here is that, it's my story, and people from all backgrounds seem to relate to the trajectory of exploring and examining the past for the absences and also the presence of what was there, and making a decision in real time from this point, not from childhood, not from the stories that your parents tell you or from what people tell you to expect of yourself, but to rewrite that story even in your 60s, which both he and I are doing, have done. He did, and I am doing. Rewriting that story again about what's possible to do. And so that is really a key message here, that there is no need to minimize your story. We need each of us to be brave. We need each of us to dig in and see, what we can explode from that story and what we can water and what wants to come alive in us.
Very true. And it's interesting too, because, everyone talks about their heroes in such a way that you've experienced your hero as being your own parent. And a lot of people do say, when they're asked as a youngster and as they're growing older, that my hero is either my mom, my dad, my grandmother. And in that respect, you've been able to accomplish not only that through the writing of this book. What does your dad think about you thinking of him as your hero?
He loves it. He loves it, but I always say it's like the mutual fan club, because
right.
He's super proud of his kids and his grandkids, and he's grateful every single day. And that's one of the gifts I feel like he has given my whole family, is his gratitude for living every day. So we don't take the little things for granted, and we try to elevate the ordinary things in life, because that's what the real meaning is.
And it's interesting as well, because talk about an inspiration. I mean, this has got to give people that force that if your dad could do it, you could do it, that you could walk through a snowstorm for a mile just to open up your store.
Right, that's right. I mean, now it seems, it's one of those stories that you would say, who does that? I mean, at the time we thought he was crazy.
Right.
But he would not think about letting down his customers. Well, all two of them who came in that day or whatever. Right. So it is a work ethic we really don't see very much anymore.
Very true. But one that we should see, and it's interesting because you wonder, we all are talking about how COVID has changed our lives to more those simpler times. Mm-hmm. And that's what's befitting too about this book, I think, because it's taking us back to those simpler times. And at the same time, we can really understand and take a grasp that how important they are today in reflecting from your book, I feel.
That's a great point. And I love that tie-in that instead of looking outward so much, we look inward. the values that we carry and the way we show up to help make the world a better place. We can help make the world a better place, and we can also do that by growing ourselves, by continuing to be curious and have a beginner's mind and believe that change is possible at any age, at any stage. And that's what I'm saying. I'm a professional coach by day.
Right.
That's my job. And one of the reasons I started looking at this book idea was because I saw how clients would come to me very successful. They looked very successful from the outside, and they too were struggling with the limitations they felt from their parents or a sibling who wasn't doing well, and carrying that story forward in such a way that they felt like it was limiting for them about what they could accomplish. And so melting that resistance, first it's the awareness, well, this is my story. My story is that my father could never hold a job, and I'm out of a job. So what does that make me? My ne'er-do-well father, right? So exploring that, taking the threads apart and allowing someone to really take off in their own way is really what living our potential is all about.
And in so many different ways, you're helping others carry that torch in so many directions.
I like to think that. Yeah,
Right?
I like to think it's a metaphor for what I do.
Right. Exactly. I agree with you.
Shining that bright light out there. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. There's no mistake of why this title is what it is, carrying my father's torch. Right?
So how did you come up with the title? Obviously, it leads into part of your dad's life, but what made this the title for you? And you said, yes, this is the title of what my journey and my father's journey is all about.
I'm so glad you asked me that, because I've been asked so many questions with my book launch, and no one else has asked me about that. And it's a fascinating process to choose a book title. I now know that, and it went through a number of iterations, but it had its very humble, fascinating beginnings. In that my father was asked to carry the Olympic torch for the Winter Olympics in the early 2000s, and our young family and all our friends came running with him. It was the coldest day that we could remember. And he had on his tracksuit and his long underwear, gloves and hat. And he ran faster than all of us because he had such adrenaline. He carried this heavy torch, his segment of the way, of the relay. And so for me, that was always a metaphor. So I always thought about it as the torch. And then I thought about it as the carrying of the torch and what that symbolized for him and for me. And the thing that I really wrestled with was whether to put Holocaust in the title, because I never wanted it to be limited to people who want to read about the Holocaust. It has such much broader, wider, deeper implications for many people, for anyone who is dealing with difficult intergenerational trauma. And so, but it just feels true, because it is this trajectory from the Holocaust trauma that my father experienced to finding his voice on the stage, to my finding my voice through the writing. And so when I landed on this, we knew, my editors and I, Eureka, like we're here. Yeah, and we tested it with people too, and they loved it.
The flame is lighting, there's no question. And I laugh because I think your dad was preparing himself for that run with the torch in the cold when he decided to walk many years ago in the cold to go to work.
Yeah.
I mean, he was preparing himself for his lifelong torchlight that you helped to exasperate to make him a world-renowned hero to the world at this point now.
Yeah, he's quite well known. He met with the Obamas. He was a guest at the White House.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the White House, and happy Hanukkah. And as we light the candles tonight, we're reminded that we're still writing new chapters in that story today. And tonight we're honored that the menorah that once belonged to the Ettingers will be lit by two Holocaust survivors from the former Czechoslovakia, Margit Meissner and Martin Weiss. But the story of Hanukkah, of survivors like Margit and Martin, leaders like Nelson Mandela, remind us that those who came before us overcame even greater obstacles than those that we face. So let's take strength from their struggles and from their sacrifice. Let's give thanks for miracles large and small. Let's recommit ourselves to building a future that shines with hope and freedom and peace. They came in a little late, but that's okay. Thank you so much. God bless you. God bless America.
And so he, ambassadors, FBI, CIA, the Navy SEALs, like he's done trainings for so many people over decades. And they remember him. They still write to him. They send him their artwork, their poetry. And there were people, there are people on who are part of the book launch effort who studied with him on a trip to Poland.
Oh, wow.
Many, many years ago. So people really stay in touch with him and they really care about him.
Gail, how is he related to the other Holocaust survivors? Has he kept in touch with them? And as we both know, the numbers are growing less of the survivors, but we need to keep their memory alive so that we never forget. How has your dad tried to keep that legacy alive of the survivors, obviously through you in many different ways, but for himself?
I believe that he made a promise to himself when he was at Mauthausen in his teens. Half his family didn't make it out. And then the family that did make it out to the States, they all died very young. So he's been the sole surviving family member of his family for probably 15 years or more. Wow. And actually it's more than that, because when he started telling his story at the museum, he said very simply, I'm doing it for them. I'm doing it for my whole community, because there were very few teenage boys, or certainly not girls, but there were very few teenage boys who did leave where he was. Right. He was one of, he said, maybe half a dozen in his whole little town. So to answer your question, he's doing it for a much bigger reason than himself, although clearly it's cathartic for himself, but he's doing it to to illuminate, again, this metaphor with the light. He's doing it to bring a message of, don't forget, this is what it was like, this was real, this happened, but it's always with a message of hope that humanity is basically good, and that the people who did what they did, the people who did terrible things, it's on them. It's not on the next generation of Germans. It's not on the generation after that. It's on the people who carried out those atrocities. So there is this spirit of hope that people find very appealing, through all the time. That's what they say about his message, is that it gives them hope in a very harsh, sometimes very harsh world. That's what this is about. My book is these secrets. They carry so much weight And it's like this code of, you will never unlock this, right? This is private, keep out, like my diaries were.
Right.
And so, and my gosh, the story in here that you must read if you haven't already is the story when I go with my father to speak to a group of German students and what that was like.
Okay.
So that was the other really hard story to tell. And it was basically the German students asking their parents, well, what do you know about what Grandma and Grandpa did in the war? Who were they? And the responses ran the whole gamut. So a lot of them were so angry that information was withheld, artifacts were withheld, parents threatened them, you can't go to this class, you're going to stir the pot, all kinds of things, and what we won't do to keep our secrets.
Right.
I think the thing that Germany has done totally right is that they've taken responsibility. They pay reparations, they say they own it, right? And so the government does anyway. And so I think that is the way people heal.
Right.
When you get it out from inside, that's how people heal. They don't heal by suppressing the truth.
True. Very true. Right. Now we should introduce your dad. Your dad's name is Marty. So what are some of Marty's Martyisms?
Yes. So I guess the one that comes up the most frequently is a phrase he uses, which is, I could have told you. I could have told you. And he has the same cadence all the time.
Right.
And unlike when he was working all the time and there were so many pressures in the store, when he became a grandfather, his temperament changed. It lightened. And he has this chuckle that people know him by, and kind of a glint in his eye for a 91-year-old. And it's just this little laugh that comes out. And there's some stories about it in the book about how when someone, he was at a party, it was an event for one of his talks. And he was talking to, 1,000 people at a time. Here, this guy who was never trained, who was never on a stage, and he had these huge audiences, and he would just get up and speak from the heart. And people would come up after, they would hug him, they would cry on his shoulder, they would ask for his autograph, and he always got a real kick out of it. And he would just say, can you imagine they came to hear me, they want my autograph. Very humble man.
Now, do you have your own Gailisms from your father?
Yes, I suppose I do. The one that is most clear is that he's a pretty fussy eater. He's a great cook, and I'm a good enough cook. I have an interest in it, but our very funny difference here is that he's never used a recipe, couldn't follow a recipe if he tried. He just a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and it always comes out great. And I have stories of when my kids were young and he would boil hot dogs, and everybody wanted to come back to Grandpa's for hot dogs because he made them so great. Everything he made, there was just something about the way he did it. So we both appreciate very good food, but I'm a recipe gal. I have stacks of recipes. I'm always on, it's something I do for fun because I like to cook, I like to bake. So I think I got it from both my parents, but it really started with him.
That's interesting. So I see a sequel book coming up that's going to be a cooking sort of book for yourself coming up soon.
Yes, that would please me greatly. And people are also asking for a poetry book because I started writing poems again. I hadn't written poems since I was in my 20s, really. And they just kind of came pouring out of me once I started on this subject and diving deep into the pain and the joy in my family's past. And I started feeling this desire to express myself through poetry. So quite a number of people are telling me they want a poetry book next.
Well,
So,
that fits in well too, because when you talk about trauma to transformation, a lot of people resort to reading a poetry to help get them through some period of their life that has affected them.
yes. And there's something about the efficiency of poetry, use of the simpler, the simpler form, fewer words kind of thing that just gets to your heart faster.
Now, how has your dad been affected by the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and yourself? Because you're in DC and a monumental woman that has made unbelievable strides in our world, and her passing.
Yes. Well, I would say that Marty is quite distressed by what's going on, what he's seeing, and he called it as early as anyone, because once you go through a regime that takes over bit by bit and starts breaking down the norms and starts blaming others for things, and pointing fingers and things, once you go through that and you live through that, you know what those signs are.
Right.
So he would include that in his talks. He always said, I wasn't supposed to, but I had to say, I had to tell them that this is what he saw, that this is, that you need to be alert for this, in terms of the breaking down of norms and the lack of respect for humanity, really. So when, she was my personal shero, and affected me very deeply. I cried, right? Because she has opened doors for women like me, women like all of us, and just was so brave, and she was willing to take on unpopular opinions and had the smarts to know how to put them through. So we've really lost a courageous soul who will be remembered and hopefully revered for a long time to come.
I believe you're so right. And it's so interesting because you're going from hero to shero in honor of RBG. And there's something where her legacy, just like your father's legacy, will live on. And obviously people like yourself and the next generation, and then the generation after that, have to continue the torches of these incredible people and their stories, because everyone has their own unique story. And this is just a piece to the bigger puzzle of life. There's no question about it.
There is no question. And that torch is within every one of us. And even when it feels like it's snuffed out, it's still there waiting to be ignited. It's still there waiting for that next relay person to help us pull it out. And so it's a story for our times, I believe, more than ever. And I couldn't have known what our times would be like when I started writing this book, is that the meaning, what does it mean to live a life that matters?
Right.
What does that mean, and where does that come from? And it comes from in here. It comes from in here, and it really matters what we do with what we're given. That it's not, we don't have to carry out someone else's ideas of how to live or what we're capable of. We're capable of much more than that.
Very true. What do you feel was the hardest chapter for you to actually write?
Oh, without a question, the hardest chapter was going back. My husband and I accompanied Marty to Mauthausen, where he was, he was imprisoned, and he had already been there to give a presentation, but he was getting on in years. He was in his 80s, and we didn't want him to travel alone and go through that. So we said we would accompany him. And so he gave his presentation along with the Barbara Gluck, who wrote the foreword to my book so graciously. And so they presented to a large group of journalists who were interested in the topic. And there was an archivist who was there, who came over to me in the lunchroom. We were eating the breaded chicken. I forget what it's called, that they're known for they were serving us on paper plates on these long rectangular tables. And he came up and he said, "Do you want a tour of the camp?" So we were in the new building, and the camp was literally behind an iron gate right next door to us. And behind that gate, you couldn't see unless you walked through the gate. And the hardest part to write about was that experience, because my husband and I were terrified. And it just so happened that Mauthausen that day was closed to the public. So it was just the three of us going through. And it was difficult to revisit what I felt, the revulsion, the physical stomach churning that I felt while I was there. It was difficult to go back to that place, and necessary to go back to that place, because we have to face the things that scare us the most.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons I wrote my book, because somebody asked me, "Well, what are you going to write about?" And I said, "Well, I have this, and this ideas." And they said, "Well, what about writing your father's story?" So I had all kinds of reasons that I couldn't write that. Other people had done it hundreds of times. He's given his testimony hundreds of times. But the thing was, my next words were, "But that's the story that scares me." And that's when I knew that was the story I had to write first.
That's incredible. And I've got to ask you, when you were going through the dialogue with your father, were a lot of the memories just so on the tip of his tongue, or did you challenge him to think about things that he may not have thought about for a long time as well?
Well, he is 91. I started writing this when he was 89. And you know what they say, as you get older, your long-term memory is right there. Plus, you have to remember he had talked about this
Right, for years.
For years, twice a week, and then all the trips he took all around this country and other countries. So I don't think I got anything out. I don't think I pulled anything out that I didn't know writing the book, but I've heard him speak so many times. There were a few times when I went to hear him speak, and he would tell a new story that I had never heard before. And that was a surprise to me, as much as it was to the audience in the room.
Oh, I'm sure, because you think you know everything until the next time. And you know what happens? People tend to tell the same stories, like over and over. So then there was an outlier. It'd be like, oh. So I started going through my notes, because I've been taking notes on what he's been saying for quite some time. Right.
And I pulled together much more material than I needed. And he's just at his core, for decades, he's a storyteller. He tells stories to help people understand what happened, so that will not happen again. He's, in a way, people like him, and not just Holocaust survivors, but anyone who has fled a nation that was under siege, they are our early warning system. If people will listen, they are the early warning system, because they know the signs.
Who's Marty's hero?
Who? I love that question. And I know exactly who it is. It was his older brother, Moishe.
Oh,
He
wow.
had an older brother, and the way he talks about him all the time is very heroically, because he was not educated in the traditional sense of the word, but he was a very strong guy, very muscular, and he took on a lot of risk and responsibility, and in the way that a older brother can in a rural community.
Right.
And so he always appeared very brave to him. And so I would say that's his hero. He doesn't have heroes like celebrities or people like that, or they're just like anybody else to him. It's the people who have courage that he really looks up to, and that's how he saw his brother. And unfortunately, his brother, this particular brother, made it through the war, and he did not make it though after the war.
Right, and that is one of those common things in a lot of people's families from that generation. And another thing that I find very interesting when you look back at your father's generation, a lot of the people in growing up, because they had to go off to war, their education level wasn't as strong as today's youth have the opportunity with their educational level, but yet they're street smart. It's sometimes tenfold, 100 times better. What's with this, Gail?
Yes, that's so true. And people are shocked to hear that he had up to an 8th grade education because of the war. They weren't allowing them to go to school anymore. And when he came to the country, the first thing he wanted to do was learn English, and he learned it from the newspaper and from television and from working in his brother-in-law's store. And then he would come home, and as tired as he was, he would pick up books. He read. He was always reading, and he was writing down the words he didn't know and looking them up in the dictionary. So that's how he increased his vocabulary. And he became, very interested in very curious and interested, as he still is, about history, about politics. And he just has a worldly sense to him that is much greater than what he has actually experienced.
What are some of those traditions that you've taken into your life, into your kids' life, that you learned growing up?
I'm not sure I would say they were traditions, because we didn't have that many traditions in the house. He was always working. Right. So it wasn't and he had left his religion pretty much in Europe. He came here and was, he was proud of being Jewish, but he was not religious the way they were in Europe. So we were not raised really that way. So I would say it was more the quality of our life, the simple quality of our life, that he passed on to our families and and his grandchildren. That family is the source of all strength. That family is, if you have your family and you have your health, you have everything. And he's very fond of saying that, and he didn't just say it, he lived that. And that has been passed along to me, to my brother, and to his grandchildren, who really honor that as well.
Right, and right now is living legacy, so to speak.
Yes, that's right. So he's very, very close to all his grandchildren, and they all call him. Nobody has to say, call your grandpa, go visit Marty. They do it on their own, which is unusual. Yeah.
Now, does he do FaceTime? Does he use the mobile devices? Is he tech savvy at this point, or is he living in that simple life just as he has advocated over the years?
Well, his desire to be tech savvy is a whole different reality than his ability to be tech savvy.
Okay.
Let's just say it like that.
The age, though, right?
But he does try. He said, I have to have an iPhone. Everybody has an iPhone. And, he'll still hang up, not hang up the phone, and you'll hang up and he'll call back a few times. It's an enigma, this whole thing. So the FaceTime, all this, it's very complex. It's become increasingly complex for him. But he always tells me, there are a lot of people I know, they don't even go on the computer. They don't even do this. They don't even do that. It's like, you're right, Dad. You've got it. You've got it going on. But the tech savvy, no, that's definitely not a strength.
The strength. What do you hope everyone takes away when they read your memoir of your father?
I hope that a couple things. I hope that everybody takes away that you can go where no one in your family has gone before. I feel that very strongly. that we see a lot. We sometimes tend to see the fault in our parents, in our legacy. We see the holes and the gaps and the wounds. And I hope that people will take away that we can have wounds and imperfections and we can buff them. We can bring them up to date, and we can allow them to be a source of strength in these difficult times, because once we connect with that legacy wound, it can really guide us. It's a place that we can trust inside, even when we can't trust those outside our world, that we can trust that place inside ourselves and let it guide us for good.
I love that. And Gail, I should ask you, what's next in your next chapter as we're following you? Because, you're sparking the interest of a nation now with this book. What should we see next for you, and what are you currently working on?
Yes, so I'm going to continue my coaching practice. I love being an executive coach because, like you said early on, I am helping to light those sparks in people who have success in one way, but not in the way they truly yearn for. Mm-hmm. So I help people to find that success in themselves. And I'd love to write another book. So I don't know what that will be yet. Maybe it's a poetry cookbook. Who knows? There
you go. That could be fun too, right?
Right. Absolutely. It'll be lighter than this one. Although this has its light moments, but it'll be lighter than that.
It'll be a lighter memoir of good recipes. Gosh, we all need some good recipes right now.
Yes.
What do you consider? We've talked a bit about COVID. What do you consider your silver lining of this era we're living in of COVID?
Got to finish my book with just the kitchen for distraction, but that's a minor thing. My silver lining comes down to family, is that my adult children were able to spend time, we were all able to spend time together because of this, and they were working remotely. And my father lived with us for a while in the beginning of COVID because we were unsure of the safety of where he was living and all that. So we've had a lot of rich family time during this time. And the other thing I think is it comes down to what you said earlier, BJ, about it being a simpler time, in that it feels like a big slowdown in a lot of ways, as so many things that we're used to doing are out of reach. And so I do believe it's the silver lining for all of us is to figure out what we want to keep in our lives and figure out what we want to get rid of, what we can release, because we carry so much that we don't need anymore. So to clear that out and make room for what we're really yearning to be. Who is that person that we're yearning to be? We don't need to endure our jobs. We don't need to hate what we do. We don't need to be around toxic people. Like, what are the choices we want to make out of this, from this place, when we have a chance to pull back a little bit and hopefully reflect a little bit about who's, are people around us bringing out the best in us, or are they taking us down? Those kind of questions, to ask ourselves those deeper questions.
I love that. And I think simultaneously it goes and reflects back to your book. So it's truly full circle for you. And I think, we need to let everyone know if they want to reach out to you for coaching, or if they want to get their signed copy of your memoir, because we are living in a world now where the book
there's a lot of reading time.
That we're going to have these virtual book signings we're going to probably see from you, that they can follow you in social media and go to your website by going to?
So website is gailgaspar.com / Carrying My Father's Torch for the book. And I am on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on LinkedIn. So easy to find me there as well. Thank you.
And Gail, they can either reach out to purchase the book directly through you.
They can go to Amazon,
okay,
and put in Carrying My Father's Torch from Holocaust Trauma to Transformation. And it's an ebook as well as paperback. And it hit #1 and #2 in 2 categories on its first day of launch. So we're very happy with that.
You couldn't ask for anything better than that.
I'm not asking for anything better. I'm very happy.
Well, Gail, congratulations on your success with the book and following one of your dreams, because it makes it so much simpler in life when you're conquering your own dreams, and you're going to be someone's hero as well someday if you already aren't. And it really is great to see you celebrating the hero of your dad and the shero of RBG and making those steps in your own life for your own legacy. What a great memoir. And we do need to remind everyone they can learn more about your book by going to the website once again at
gailgaspar.com/carrying my father's torch.
And Gail, we're going to hold you to it. You will do a book signing for people that request it as well, right?
Yes, actually, I have great book plates that my daughter designed. So people want to buy those books, I'll sign. For your listeners and your people who are watching this show, I'll sign for them if they want. They just need to reach out to me.
Gail, it's been wonderful. Well, until next time, this is BJ Korros, and you're watching Shout Out for a Cause at Home Edition with our guest today,
Gail Weiss Gaspar.
And reminding you can get a copy of her book,
Carrying My Father's Torch, From Holocaust Trauma to Transformation.
There you go, folks. You can get her book, Carrying My Father's Torch, From Holocaust Trauma to Transformation. And you can learn more by going to her website. You can also follow her on social media. Until next time, this is BJ Korros. You're watching Shout Out for a Cause at Home Edition. Thanks again to our guest, Gail. Congratulations on your book launch.
Thank you for having me, BJ.